No one remembered the farm for what it once was. By the time people started talking about it again, it had become a stretch of forgotten red soil at the edge of the county, fenced off, overgrown, and passed daily without a second glance. The locals called it Redland Farm because of the iron-heavy dirt that stained boots and truck tires the color of rust. It had been quiet for years. Too quiet. In early 2005, the land still belonged to a family that had lived there for generations. The farmhouse sat back from the road, half hidden by low trees and collapsing sheds, its paint faded to a dull chalky gray. Behind it stretched acres of uneven pasture, broken only by an old water tower, a disused fuel tank, and a barn that leaned slightly to one side, as if it had grown tired of standing. 3 children lived there. The eldest was a boy, 9 years old, often seen wearing a blue t-shirt and loose trousers that were always dusted at the knees. One of the girls was 8, frequently dressed in a green gown she refused to part with. The youngest, just 7, usually wore a white dress with shorts underneath, a hand-me-down outfit that made her look smaller than she already was. They were siblings. 2 girls and 1 boy. And one afternoon, they vanished. The last confirmed sighting came from a delivery driver who passed the farm shortly before dusk. He later told police he saw 3 children near the fence line, walking toward the dirt road that led away from the property. One of the girls stood out to him, the one in green, because she was clutching a doll tightly to her chest, its fabric dress matching her own. At the time, it didn't seem important. When the children didn't come back for dinner, the family assumed they were playing somewhere on the property. It wasn't unusual for them to wander the fields, chase insects near the barn, or sit behind the old storage tanks where adults rarely went. Night fell. Still, no sign of them. By the time authorities were called, panic had already taken hold. Search teams arrived within hours. Deputies, volunteers, and neighbors combed the fields with flashlights, calling the children's names into the dark. The land was searched again and again, on foot, on horseback, later by dogs. Every shed was opened. The barn was inspected from floor to rafters. Even the shallow creek at the edge of the property was drained and checked. Nothing. No footprints leading away. No torn clothing. No signs of a struggle. The case immediately unsettled investigators. 3 children disappearing at once was rare. Disappearing without a trace from open farmland made even less sense. There were no reports of suspicious vehicles. No neighbors reported screams. No evidence suggested the children had planned to run away. Within days, the case attracted regional attention. News crews stood at the edge of the dirt road, filming the farmhouse in silence. Photos of the siblings were broadcast repeatedly. The boy smiling shyly, the older girl holding her doll, the youngest staring wide-eyed at the camera. The doll became a focal point. Investigators asked repeatedly if the girl ever went anywhere without it. The answer was always the same: no. If the doll wasn't found, neither was she. Weeks passed. Then months. The search expanded beyond Redland Farm. Fields miles away were examined. Abandoned buildings were checked. Ponds and wells on neighboring properties were drained. Tips poured in, most of them false. Some claimed they'd seen 3 children walking along highways. Others insisted they'd spotted them at bus stations or rest stops. None led anywhere. Eventually, resources dried up. By the end of the year, the case was officially labeled a cold disappearance. The land remained untouched, preserved almost unwillingly by grief and uncertainty. The farmhouse stood empty. Redland Farm became a place people avoided, not because of what was known, but because of what wasn't. For 12 years, nothing changed. Then, in late 2017, the county approved a redevelopment project. The farmland had been sold quietly, its history buried beneath paperwork and time. Surveyors arrived first. Then contractors. Heavy machinery rolled onto soil that hadn't been disturbed since the children vanished. On the third day of excavation, a backhoe struck something solid beneath the surface. At first, the operator assumed it was debris, an old water tank or discarded equipment. But when the dirt was cleared away, what emerged was unmistakable: a large cylindrical tank, buried deliberately, sealed, and positioned too carefully to be accidental. Authorities were called immediately. When investigators arrived, they recognized the tank from old property records. It had been removed from use decades earlier and was never supposed to have been buried. Its presence raised immediate questions. Why would anyone go to the effort of concealing it underground? The tank was opened on site. Inside, investigators found evidence that stopped the entire operation. Alongside decayed fabric and personal items was something painfully recognizable: a small doll, its green gown faded, torn, and caked with dirt. The same doll shown in broadcast photos years earlier. The same doll the girl had been holding the day the children vanished. Time had not spared it. The fabric was stiff. The stitching was frayed. Its face was stained, almost beyond recognition. But there was no doubt. The doll had been underground for a very long time. As forensic teams secured the area, one truth became unavoidable. The children had never left Redland Farm. And whatever happened to them had been hidden in plain sight the entire time. As the excavation expanded and the tank was examined more closely, investigators began to realize the burial had not been rushed. It had been planned. And someone who knew the land well, had made sure the truth stayed buried for over a decade. What they would uncover next would reopen every unanswered question from 2005. And point toward a presence on that farm no one had ever truly accounted for. The discovery of the buried tank shut down the entire redevelopment project within hours. Yellow tape went up. Officers blocked the dirt road that led to the former farmhouse. What had been an ordinary worksite that morning was now the most closely guarded location in the county. For many of the investigators who arrived that day, the case was not new. Some had been rookies when the children disappeared in 2005. Others had studied the file during training. 3 siblings, no suspects, no evidence, no closure. It was the kind of case that quietly followed a department for years, resurfacing whenever someone asked, "Whatever happened to those kids?" Now, finally, there was something real. The tank was carefully lifted from the ground and transported to a secure facility. Forensic teams worked slowly, methodically, documenting every inch of it. What they found confirmed the fear no one wanted to say out loud. Inside were human remains. Time had done what it always does. Bones were fragile, clothing mostly decomposed, details blurred by soil and moisture. But the number was unmistakable. 3 sets of remains. 3 children. The ages matched. The positioning suggested they had been placed deliberately, not thrown in. This was not an accident. As news broke, the community reacted with a mix of shock and guilt. For 12 years, Redland Farm had sat there, untouched. People had driven past it. Kids had played nearby. And all the while, the answer had been buried beneath a few feet of dirt. Investigators reopened the case immediately. Boxes of old files were pulled from storage. Audio tapes from interviews long forgotten were digitized. Photos taken during the original search were re-examined with new eyes. Every detail that once seemed irrelevant was now suspect. One question rose above all others. How had search teams missed this? The answer was uncomfortable. Back in 2005, the focus had been on the surrounding land, open fields, nearby roads, wooded edges. The buried tank hadn't been flagged because, at the time, no one knew it existed. It didn't appear on modern maps. It was assumed to have been removed years earlier, and the soil above it had been leveled so cleanly that even trained searchers walked right over it. Whoever buried it knew exactly what they were doing. As investigators traced the farm's history, they began identifying people who had intimate knowledge of the property. Former workers, neighbors, individuals who had lived there or worked the land long before the disappearance. Most were elderly now. Some were dead. Then came the tip. It arrived quietly, through a recorded line set up after the discovery. A woman in her late 20s called and asked to remain anonymous. Her voice shook as she spoke. She said she had been a child in 2005 and remembered something that had haunted her ever since, but she'd never told anyone. She said her father used to work near Redland farm. On the night the siblings vanished, she remembered waking up and seeing him outside their house, scrubbing mud from his boots long past midnight. She said he wasn't drunk, wasn't angry, just silent. When she asked where he'd been, he told her never to mention that night again. At the time, she was too young to understand what that meant. Now, she couldn't forget it. Detectives tracked down the man. He was living alone in a nearby town, frail and battling serious health issues. When questioned, he initially denied everything. He claimed he hadn't worked near Redland farm in years. But records told a different story. Payroll logs placed him there regularly in 2005. When confronted with the evidence, his story changed. He admitted he had been on the property that night. But he insisted he hadn't harmed the children. He claimed someone else had already done something terrible before he arrived. According to him, he was asked to help move something heavy, something wrapped, something he was told never to ask about. He refused to say who asked him. Investigators pushed harder. They asked about the tank. His breathing changed when they mentioned it. He closed his eyes. And for a moment, it seemed like he might finally break. Instead, he said only one thing. They were never supposed to be found. The interview ended shortly after. Within weeks, the man passed away, taking whatever else he knew with him. As forensic analysis continued, more disturbing details emerged. Soil samples inside the tank matched the area near the barn, not where the tank was ultimately buried. That meant the children had been placed inside somewhere else, then moved later. Possibly days later. Possibly by someone trying to erase mistakes. And then there was the doll. The green gown was confirmed to be handmade, stitched by someone close to the family. That narrowed things further. Whoever buried the tank hadn't bothered to remove it. Either they didn't notice it, or they wanted it there. Investigators began to suspect the children had trusted the person who led them away. There were no signs of restraint on the remains. No evidence of a struggle at the burial site. Whatever happened likely began indoors, or somewhere familiar. As whispers spread through the town, suspicion followed. People started looking at one another differently. Old memories resurfaced. Half-remembered arguments. Strange behavior dismissed years earlier suddenly felt important. But despite everything, confessions that stopped short, evidence that pointed but didn't name, the case stalled again. There was still no single living person who could be charged. And the most frightening question remained unanswered. If someone helped hide the truth, who was the one who caused it? Because whoever that person was, they had vanished just as completely as the children themselves. And the deeper investigators dug into the family's final days on Redland Farm, the clearer it became that the disappearance didn't begin outside, it began inside the house. When investigators turned their focus back to the farmhouse, they weren't looking for new evidence. They were looking for patterns, things that had been dismissed years earlier because there was nothing concrete to attach them to. In cold cases, the truth rarely announces itself. It hides in routine, in silence, in the spaces between what people say and what they avoid saying. The interior of the house no longer existed in its original form. Years of neglect, followed by partial demolition during early redevelopment work, meant much of it was gone. But archived photographs from 2005 told their own story. Children's shoes by the door. 3 toothbrushes in the bathroom. A kitchen table set for dinner that was never eaten. Nothing appeared disturbed. Back then, that detail had reassured investigators. Now, it disturbed them. If the children had been taken by force, something would have been overturned. A chair knocked back. A door damaged. Instead, the house looked as if the children had simply stood up and walked away. That realization reframed everything. Investigators began reconstructing the final day, hour by hour. School records confirmed all 3 children had been home that day. No visitors were officially logged. No calls to emergency services. No neighbors reported anything unusual, except one statement that had been buried deep in the original file. A woman living 2 properties away had mentioned seeing an unfamiliar adult on the farm that afternoon. At the time, she hadn't thought much of it. Farms had visitors, workers, delivery drivers. Her description was vague. Tall, wearing a hat, standing near the barn. The report had gone nowhere. Now, it became critical. Detectives canvassed the area again, speaking to people who had lived nearby in 2005. Most had moved on. Some had died. Memories were faded, unreliable. But one thing came up repeatedly: the barn. Several witnesses recalled seeing the children near it shortly before they disappeared. One remembered the boy in his blue shirt opening the barn door. Another remembered the girl in the green gown sitting on the steps, her doll in her lap. No one remembered them leaving. That suggested the children had gone inside. The barn, according to old blueprints, had a reinforced concrete floor. Beneath it, partially concealed, was an access point leading to underground storage once used for fuel and water, structures that were never properly documented when they fell out of use. Structures like tanks. Investigators now believed the children may have been placed inside the tank on the same night they vanished, not years later. The later burial was likely an attempt to hide a mistake that someone realized couldn't stay hidden forever. The autopsy reports couldn't determine exact causes of death. Time had erased too much. But there were no signs of prolonged suffering. No evidence of escape attempts. That suggested whatever happened was sudden, and possibly involved someone the children trusted enough not to resist. The person responsible was never identified. There was no trial. No conviction. Only a reconstructed narrative built from fragments. A witness who saw too little, a man who admitted helping but not causing, a letterless silence where answers should have been. When the remains were finally returned to the family for burial, the service was private. No cameras. No speeches. Just 3 small caskets lowered into the ground, 12 years too late. The doll was buried with them. Today, Redland Farm no longer exists. The land was cleared, repurposed, reshaped into something unrecognizable. New families live nearby. Children play where others once disappeared. Most people don't know what lies beneath the history of the place. But investigators know this much. The children never wandered off. They were never taken far. They were never forgotten by the land itself. And somewhere out there, Someone knows exactly what happened inside that farmhouse and barn in 2005. Someone who has lived 12 years, and counting, with the weight of that knowledge. The case remains officially open. No suspect has ever been named. No one has ever been held responsible. And the silence surrounding Redland Farm stands as the final reminder that sometimes, the truth isn't lost. It's buried. What do you think really happened on that farm? And who do you believe was involved? Was this a crime of opportunity, or something planned long before that day? Drop your theories in the comments below. If stories like this matter to you, please support the channel by liking this video, subscribing, and sharing it with someone who loves deep, unsolved cases. Every bit of support helps keep these stories alive, and keeps the search for truth going.